everyone. Tony here. Welcome to the PerformanceLabs.ai podcast. So, on this podcast, we're all about showcasing startups, ambitious founders, really diving into their journeys to revenue traction and kind of how they got started. Today, I am joined and extremely excited to be with Ricky Sutton, the most recent founder, your most recent project of Future Media. But good to see you again, my man. How you been?
Good to see you, Tony. Delighted to be along, and congrats with this new startup, mate. Sounds awesome.
Thank you. It's exciting, but as you know, it can be scary at times, but that's okay. That's part of it.
That's what we're here to talk about, right?
That's,
Tease that stuff
that's
out.
exactly right. Yeah, last time I saw you, we were at a pub in London, one of your favorites.
Yeah, I was over seeing Reuters. I used to live in London. I'm actually from the UK. I live in Australia now. But those pubs right along the Thames there are some of the oldest pubs in the world. And they do a great beer. I think you can testify to that.
I can, and while this will suffice for now, I hope the next time we see one another is in a pub in London or elsewhere.
Who knows?
So the kind of the purpose here, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is kind of take the audience through a bit of your career history, how you got started. You've had a storied career, started with News Corp, behemoth media company. You were part of the MySpace acquisition team, which I still remember Tom, the Tom avatar. You were a war correspondent, which is insane, and you've told me some stories about that. But also the founder of Uvu. So your career path has been really far from linear, to say the least. But can you give the audience kind of a high level overview of starting your journalism career at 17 all the way through to today?
Yeah, look, I came from a fairly small country town in the UK, but my dad was an adventurer. He ran away to sea when he was 16, and so I felt the adventure gene clearly. And so when I was 12 years old, I was watching the TV with my dad, and the Falklands War was happening. If you remember, there was an Argentinian invasion of an island that was controlled by the UK. And so I decided then I wanted to be a war correspondent. And I told my dad, I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be a war correspondent. I was 12. And he was like, that's great. Don't tell your mum and don't die. Right. That was basically the rules.
Good message.
And so yeah, and so I was really determined to do that. So there were no journalists in my family. And the only way I was going to be able to achieve that dream was if I did it myself. And so before I finished school at 16, high school at 16, I went and persuaded the local authority, my local council, to fund my education. I left home 2 weeks after leaving school at 16 and went to journalism college and became a journo, and I loved it. And I started on little local papers, and then it became larger papers, and then at 20 I was the news editor of a regional newspaper. And then a war happened, a war I could drive to. The war in the Balkans happened. And so even though I was the news editor of a 200-person news team, I went to my editor and just said, "Boss, look, there's literally a war I can drive to. I have to go." And so he gave me permission. Off I went. That kind of made me renowned in the national papers in the UK. I was given jobs in the national papers in the UK. You mentioned I went to News Corp and did work there for years. But then since then, I've moved to Australia. I've started a tech company, and I'm sure that's what we're going to talk about today. So look, yeah, it's not a linear path, but to be honest with you, it's been a very exciting one. I think maybe I've been chasing, always trying to be focused on what's coming next rather than what's happening today.
Well, you're a disruptor in just about every venture that you've had. So that definitely speaks to the interest early on and kind of that adventurous mindset. So at 17, I believe you started at the Bath Chronicle. Is that correct?
Yeah, super small little newspaper, sold 12,000 papers a
Right.
day. And it was, a nice place to live. And, I was earning, I'm trying to remember the number now. I think I earned about £4,000, which wasn't really enough. But, that's where I started out. And they gave me a chance, right? I was a kid with no real right to be working for a daily newspaper at 17.
Yeah.
But, the editor put his faith in me and gave me a gig.
So then on to Express and Echo, and that kind of began the journey, right?
Yeah, so, at the time, people were quite transient in journalism. So, you'd start on a paper, you'd make a name for yourself, and then you'd get a job offer from another one. And then it wasn't that far. It was about, kind of 100 miles down the motorway to go to Exeter. So the job became a bit more senior.
Okay.
And then I ended up on the news desk of that paper, helping out helping run the news team. I think I would have been 18 and a half.
Wow.
So I was always going hard and going fast. I was first in, I was last home. I thought about other than football and having an occasional beer, I was pretty much focused on the office. And then the team that ran the Express and Echo in Exeter was moved en masse to a much larger regional paper in the South Wales of the UK, which was a national paper. It's the national paper of Wales. And we moved en masse as a team. And so I came over to work on the news desk there with an amazing editor who was just like, no rules apply. We are going to build the best regional newspaper in the country. And I was lucky to be in a team of real hard go-getters. And we did some really interesting journalism, some really interesting work. And I was absolutely thrilled. I mean, we started work at 5 a.m. every day, and we didn't leave the office till 7 at night every night. And then we went straight from there to football and played football. So it's an incredibly tight-knit team. Um, but I love that, and I learned so much because you very much learn working on local papers. I know you know this, Tony, from the people you've worked with. That people who work on local papers are deeply passionate about their communities, and they really do want to be focused on what those people are thinking about first thing in the morning and last thing at night. You live in the community with them. You feel it too, right? If there's a pothole in the main road, it needs to get fixed, because you drove over it twice today, right? So that's how you feel. And I certainly felt that. But to be honest with you, I think looking back, it was an inevitable trajectory that I was passing through there on my way to an international career. Although at the time, I think that I probably would have been relatively happy to stay.
Yeah, and you don't get to the office at 5 a.m. unless you're passionate or making a obscene amount of money. So I'm guessing it was the passion at that moment in time.
And people would certainly tell you that I'm passionate before I'm rich. So
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So then from journalism, you kind of got into the digital strategy, digital video strategy space, of course, with Microsoft, then with
Mm.
Fairfax, and with Fairfax, you kind of by based on your background, you kind of saw the future. You saw where video and video strategy was going, and really got into the VOD space. Kind of saw that through the crystal ball, if you will. Yeah, in that moment of time, what drove you to understand that VOD was going to be as big as it was, not only from a distribution standpoint, but also a revenue standpoint?
Well, I'd already moved from the UK to Australia at that point, and I controlled the P&L of News Corp in the region. And
Okay.
so, in fact, actually, look, let me show you. I've got a sheet of paper here. This is a sheet of paper I actually drew. I actually posted this yesterday in my Substack. I actually drew this piece of paper to the CEO of News Corp Australia in 2006, something like that, and just basically said, look, it's really simple. It's two lines. It says, this line here says, our costs of our business, okay, are going up. So people, paper, everything else, and it's 2006 over here. And our revenue in terms of CPM and sell through, okay, is going down because we're moving to digital. So our cost base is going up, but our revenue is going down. And like, you don't need a forensic accountant to figure out that somewhere around here in 2020, we're going to go into loss. And I'm not an accountant. I didn't go to university. But the simple logic is if I can't afford the bread, I can't eat, right? And so I was like, we've got to do something here. And so I sat down and I asked the bosses at the time, like, what do you think is your most important asset? What's the best asset we have in our business? And they said, oh, it's our content. And I said, well, it is, except the content doesn't pay your bills, right? You think it does, but it doesn't. The advertising pays your bills at the moment. And for your advertising to be valid, your audience, you have to have your audience. So the most important asset, if you break it down to the lowest common denominator, is your audience, okay? Because you can have all the best content in the world, but with no readers, you've got nothing, right? And there are people coming to challenge you that have terrible content, but massive audiences, and they're making 25 times as much money as you. So it has to be the audience that's the most important asset. And I was kind of screaming into a void. No one cared, Tony. But what I did know was that if a reader, and we had 60% market share, if a reader in this market was worth $2 or $3, a month in display advertising, that same reader was worth $30 to $40 per
Yeah.
month if they were watching video. And given that people wanted to watch video, because we knew whenever we gave them video, they watched it, and given that we knew that advertisers couldn't find video at scale, and given that everybody wanted to launch, and we had an English-speaking, digitally savvy audience of 22 million people with no service whatsoever, it felt like
Yeah.
a gaping hole. And so for me, I wanted to be able to create streaming. So I was given my head. We did it. We built the first streaming services in Australia. I'm really proud of that.
That's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah, must have been a moment. So obviously, you start to connect those dots from journalism to Fairfax and Microsoft. That led ultimately to your first real startup, which was Uvu. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of
Yeah.
Uvu and how that all came about?
Yeah, I will just say that just before we get there. So pretty much every business that I've done in journalism has also been a startup in a way. I
Yeah.
didn't really know that I had the entrepreneur gene, but there was no one else that I knew that had run off to war in a transit van, right? So I
Right.
guess that was a
Right.
startup in a way,
Sure.
if you view it through that lens. And, certainly the streaming services that we launched were absolutely startups. They were just incubated in a big business. My
Right.
challenge was that I wanted to build something truly awesome, and scale it to be global, but the companies I worked for wanted it to be local. And I was like, but the opportunity is massive, right? Like,
Right.
when we built, it was called SMH TV, Sydney Morning Herald TV. We had over 200 broadcasters that put their content into there. And I had calls from publishers all over the world saying, hey, we want one of these, please. And I was working nights helping them build them. And I went to Fairfax and said, look, we've got a business here. Like, I've got publishers all over the world asking to pay money to do this. Let's do it, right? Let's build a new business unit. And they were like, no, we've got much more we've got parochial problems we have to solve, and we don't have time for that. And so in many ways, I was eventually squeezed out of mass media because the only way I could satisfy my itch was to leave. And my loyalty, to be honest, my loyalty was to the audience. That's what I cared about most. I
Yeah.
cared about providing awesome services to the consumer, which is what I think any journalist should feel. And if a media company doesn't feel it can provide the best service to its consumers, it doesn't feel like it's on the right path for me. And
Yeah.
so, I've always been, by the way, I've also been terrible my whole career at managing up, because my assumption is like, you must be 50 times smarter than me. And
Yeah.
so therefore I should listen to everything you say. But all I ever heard them say was no, right?
Yeah.
And so in the end, it's just like, I've got no choice. I'm going to make it yes. And that meant
Yeah.
leaving. So I quit at the top of my career. I sold my house and my car, and self-funded my own business to build an AI company. So this was 2014. If you walked into an investor and said, "Hey, I'm going to launch an AI company," they were just like, "No." And so, yeah, we self-funded the company for a couple of years, 4 years. Myself and the two founders went unsalaried for 4 years.
Wow.
We signed News Corp as our first customer. We were net profitable in about 2.5 years, and the business got off and running. But that was just the beginning of a journey. So I think I learned more in that time running Uvu than I did in the 20
Yeah.
years prior, running the biggest newsrooms in the world. So that is definitely something I'd encourage any other
Yeah.
irritated and itchy journalist to get out and do.
So of course, having recently started Performance Labs, launching next Tuesday, which I'm excited about. We always love a good revenue growth story. Of course, if
Yeah.
investors weren't there because you were the crazy AI guy, how did you start to gain traction from a monetary standpoint to start to grow and scale?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I've actually never been asked that specific question, so I appreciate it because it's vital. So imagine the scene. I've got a few $100,000 from of my own money burning every day. Now
Yeah,
that tends to motivate you, let me tell you. That helps with focus.
definitely
And
helps.
so, I would literally make sure that at the start of every day, I'd have a list of three things on a post-it note that would generate revenue that I would try and do that day. And if I hadn't ticked all three of them off by the end of the day, right, then I'd failed. And if by the end of the week I hadn't found a way to make new money, the weekend was tortured,
Yeah,
tortured,
yeah,
right? And so you had to start to make money. And I knew what it was costing me every week. That was painfully clear. And this was
yep.
my assets burning. And so I had to find a way to get there. So what happened was um, I went to all the world's global broadcasters, because I needed their video. What the business did was it read articles with AI and it watched videos with AI and it matched the two of them together in 2014. So we were clearly out on the bleeding edge, right? Which had its
Yeah.
benefits and its problems, right?
Smart.
It
Yep.
was very
You
limited.
find yourself a solution in need of a problem, right?
Yeah, and we knew it was going to be a problem, right? Because we
Yeah.
knew publishers had to put a video in every article and they didn't have enough staff to do it, right? News Corp in Australia publishes 2,500 stories an hour. So, you had to automate the process for it to win. And so we started to automate it. But as you just rightly pointed out, the customers didn't know they needed it yet. That was our job to explain it to them.
Yep.
And so I've got to make money. And so we persuaded all of the world's major broadcasters, the BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, CNN, like everyone. I literally went to see them knowing on these flights that I had no money to pay for these flights. And I went to see them and I said, look, here's the deal. I can't pay you for this today. I
Yeah.
need you to give me your content for free on a revenue share, and I will pay you as I go. I will pay you 50 cents on the dollar for everything I do. And I remember people were just like, they are never, Ricky, ever, ever going to do that. And they all did. And so we ended
Well,
up with about,
that was a moment in time where I remember working for a television station, and they were at that moment in time. There was an acquisition that happened, and they physically shipped us servers because they were so afraid at that time to transfer all of that data over the web, right?
that's right. We faced all those challenges. I think I can be quite compelling when I get in someone's face.
I know
I
that.
was just like, the future that you're working in television is ending. Streaming is rising. You're selling your content to who you think are going to be big streaming winners. This was,
Mhm.
prior to Netflix, right? You're spending your money, with who you think are going to be the streaming winners, who you currently think are the cable companies. But what you're
Yep.
missing is that the largest untapped audience of all is the 126 billion pages of news content that don't have a video in them. And the
Yep.
stories that the papers are covering are the same stories you're covering in video. So we have the right hand and the left hand, but what we don't have is any connector or brain in the middle. And so nothing's working. And what we need to do is to bring those two things together. And we can be the kind of the stitch or the tech that can stitch these two things together. So given we cost you nothing and given any revenue is upside and it's a market you're not in, it can only be incremental. And therefore you should give it to us. And so we were successful in doing that. So we got the supply side of the business, the video. We had $1 billion of video. We had 1,400 videos an hour being delivered into our platform, which was all very expensive and burning out of my pocket over here. But then what we needed was the other side of the market. We needed the audience. We needed the demand side, which was the publishers. And so I knew how much money I needed to cover my costs. And so I went to News Corp here in Australia and I said, look, I've got all the video you need to match your articles and I've built the technology. I've done this on my own risk. I'm all in. Okay, right? All my chips are down. I'm doing this. And you know me, and you should trust me, and we should do this. None of it mattered. All they cared about was the dollars. All the loyalty was gone. It was just, how much money am I going to make, Ricky? And I was like, well, funnily enough, you'll make exactly as much money as you want to make, given how much effort you make. If you allow me to put a video in every article, you're going to make $13, $14 million a year. If you decide to only try a little bit, you're going to make nothing. So really, for the first time ever, you've got an opportunity where exactly what you do is returned in dollars. So I don't know, give it a go. What do you think? And they said, eventually I persuaded them to say yes, by literally beating on the door. And then when it came to it, I had a cash flow problem. I was short of cash. And so I offered them a 50-50 revenue share, right, to them as well. So $100 comes in, 50 cents goes to the publisher, and 50 cents comes to me, and 50% of my 50 cents goes to the broadcaster. That was the deal, 50, 25, 25. Yeah, but I had a cash flow problem because I had so much video, it was costing me a fortune. I was going to run out of money. And so I went to News Corp and I said, and I need you to pay me $100,000 to onboard it. And they looked at me and they went, okay. And I was like, what? Okay, right, fine. Okay. So we're off to the races. And that was really where it started. So with that, as soon as we charged $100,000 for the deployment, and we provided all the video and we got them off and running, the business was earning $70,000, $80,000 a month within 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And so, the business grew. And so the logic existed. But yeah, look, my lesson from it was, lots of people launch startups with investor capital and then try and earn money, but they don't really care enough because they're not really feeling the pain. If it's your money, you'll find it self-motivated.
Makes it a tad easier to work 12, 14-hour days, right?
Yeah, your ass is on fire. Without making too fine a point of it, right? It's terrifying. You run the risk of losing everything. I had 2 children, right? You've got to make sure that it works, right? You can't fail.
So then, kind of stepped away from Uvu, now your latest venture, which is your future media Substack, which you were the person that got me into writing more and posting more, but your content puts mine to absolute shame, probably because of the journalist at 17 aspect of things. Tell me a little bit about your Substack, future media. What kind of content do you cover?
Ironically, I'm back to the future, or what would the right thing to be? I'm going from the future back to my past. So again, I can feel that same itch. And the itch is that big tech got so big that it was eating itself. All right. So I've been on stage all over the world for the last 13 years, give or take, saying that Google has too much power. It decides who reads what, and it decides how it's monetized. And the youth audience and the one-to-one relationship that publishers used to have with its readers, we talked about it in the local paper, is no longer with the local paper. It's now with Facebook. And so what we've got is the tech companies have taken away our distribution and our conversation with our audience. And you can't succeed because I told you at the beginning that the most important asset of a media business is its audience. It's not our audience anymore, it's Facebook's. And our distribution to them is no longer ours, it's Google's. Like, this was a massive crisis. And I've been telling publishers this for years and they wouldn't listen. They just would not listen. Maybe they needed to look at this again, right?
I would share that with them, yes.
Yeah, they just would not listen. And they were saying, no, they'll just pay us. I was like, they won't. They won't, because they don't need the content. They view the content for free. They view the content as a revenue share, but they can become a media company faster than you can become a tech company. And so they will eventually figure out that the majority of the money comes from making their own content, and AI is coming. And as soon as you mentioned AI, they just dismissed you instantly, like, no. And I spoke to CEOs all over the world. There were over 250 broadcasters and publishers in Uvu. I spoke to all of them at C-suite level over the years and told them the same thing and warned them, and no one listened. But they're all listening now because it's happened, right? And so that's where the Substack came from, is that there's a story from ancient Greece. okay, about a princess called Cassandra. And Cassandra was the apple of the eye of one of the gods. And the god gave her the power of foresight. He gave her the ability to see the future as a gift. And she knew what was going to happen. But when she then spurned his advances, he cursed her by making it impossible that anybody would believe her. So even though she could see disasters, wars, famines, and her own death coming, when she told people, they ignored her. That's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
And so I would go to editors and say to them, I've got Cassandra complex. I know what's going to happen to you. And if you listen, I can help you avoid it. But if you don't listen, there's nothing I can do. And so ultimately, again, I find myself in the same position. I could tell you, but they're not going to listen. So the only thing to do is to do it myself. And so I started the Substack to write down the things that I was predicting so that they existed in black and white. And so I could say, that's what I told you. There it is, just there. Like I told you, it's played out exactly like I told you. So, we have Google in the antitrust trial, the third antitrust trial now. I've been calling for antitrust for more than a decade. I have made the case. I've spoken to the FTC and the DOJ. I know half of the witnesses. It was always going to happen, but people just didn't want to hear it. It's more convenient to not think about the future. So the Substack exists to put down on paper and be held accountable for predictions about what's going to happen, because my belief, I hope, is that people will eventually go, well, he was right then, and then, and as a result, I'll believe him now. But this isn't about enrichment. It really isn't. This is about trying to save my industry from itself, which is happier sometimes to just stand in the road and see the headlights coming and figure someone else is going to save them. I want to educate them to make better decisions beforehand and be wise before the event, not afterwards.
It is a courageous cause, and one that I think you and I both know well is a challenge, a great Greek analogy for sure, and it's very true to the current state of most media organizations. So the DOJ antitrust case with Google has been a huge focus of yours on the Future Media Substack. How is that playing into your subscription models? You and I talked a bit ago about some early day, first subscribers, but how does that all factor in?
So what I learned from Uvu, right? Well, actually, I think my learning started with running the P&L and News Corp, because you could see, there were so many things in that P&L. It ran for like 180 pages. And I used to say, look, that's all great. I understand all of that. I know what that says in cell FG 743 over there. I know what that says. But what I want to know is what the front page says. And the front page says that line's going down, that one's going up. Our problem is on the front page, not on that over there. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when I had Uvu, I did exactly the same thing. I built real-time analytics that would tell me every morning, Ricky, you're a failure today, and you have to fix it by 3:00. And so, sorry, no, go away. It's the kids.
You gotta let them in, right?
And so I had to solve the problem. So with the Substack, I thought that the Substack would generate revenue from subscriptions, but it's actually teased out a whole host of unexpected revenue streams, and I've got them on the wall here. So I literally force myself to walk past the numbers every day. It's pinned to the wall right now, but in the morning it's pinned to my computer. So the first thing I see when I walk in is this list. So you cannot avoid it. There are 3 post-it notes on the top of my computer with dollar signs on it, 1, 2, and 3. And whenever I get an email, it's like, which of those 3 does it hit? And if it's that one with the $3 on it, you do that first, even if you don't want to. Just focus, right? And so anyway, so I started to write them down where the money was to be made. So this is the order, and I'll tell you how I've proceeded on all of them, because the Substack, which has 3,000 subscribers today, has generated $700,000 in revenue this year. Just me, with 0 costs. Okay, so I'll be very open, because I think you have to share this stuff, because you hope that it provides insight. And I find it very frustrating that people that are successful at making money don't share it, because everybody needs to do it. So I'm going to be very open. All right. So the first thing was, I'll find a sponsor for it. Now, to get a sponsor, you need sufficient audience. But the other thing is that the people that come are who are the audience, right? 80% of the people that visit my Substack are C-suite media executives in the top 600 media companies across the world. And the second largest cohort of people in the Substack are from Google. So incredibly rich audience to try to get to. There are half a dozen global media CEOs sitting in there, and half a dozen more who haven't signed up themselves, but their PAs have. So I still know who they are, right? So the first thing is that sponsorship, right? So there are organizations that really want to reach those people, and my Substack is in their personal inbox 3 times a week. So that's valuable. So the subscriptions are now coming in at $10,000 a month US, and I've got 3 at a time. That generates money. Okay. I don't run all 3 of them at a time. I run one at a time, but there's always one or other that's running, and they're generally people trying to have a conversation with that level of C-suite exec. The second thing is syndication. So you get these phone calls that come in, and this will happen to other people, I'm sure, that listen to this podcast. And people are saying, hey, look, I'd really like to run your article, or maybe you could write for us, or maybe you could do us a favor, right? If they're a media company with multi-million dollar revenues and they pay Reuters, then they pay me. All right. And so I have a syndication deal. Yeah. And so those syndication deals, I have 3 now. I have 1 in the US, 1 in the UK, and 1 here in Australia. They generate 5 to 10 grand combined a month. But that's just money for doing what I'm doing already, but it also gets your Substack out and gets it seen by some more people. So there's value in that. I started podcasting. So I originally had an AI that read my articles onto the web. That was okay. Then I started to record them myself. That was okay. Then I started to be asked to appear on lots of guest podcasts. And I did that, and that was fun. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that. And I really found it a way to hone my skills. That led to a radio program. So I started to be paid to appear on a radio program every Tuesday morning. And so I did that. And all it was doing was honing my skills and getting me better and better and better at telling this story or doing what I was doing. And also the way I write my Substack is quite colorful. So it lends itself to a spoken medium. And so now, out of the blue, just literally in the last month, a global media company has rung and has added me to their podcasting roster. They're paying a salary to podcast for them. They're paying me a share of revenue for doing it, and they're building me a studio. So all because of what I wrote in a newsletter. Okay, so it's all foundational to the newsletter and the audience that it goes to. Then you're thinking, okay, well, I've done quite well. And then I stopped and I wrote down, what other things can I make money from? So public speaking. So I get asked to speak all over the world fairly regularly. And I say, sure, can you cover my expenses? And they say, yeah. And then I jump on a plane. I spend 2 days flying to the other side of the world from Australia because it's far away. And I get on stage, I talk, I make loads of friends. I come back feeling inspired, and it helps me write more stuff in my Substack. But I decided to get an agent, and I felt really silly about it. But I went to an agent and I said, look, I'd like to do more public speaking. And, I wonder if there's money to be made from this. And so the next time I got a call asking me to do a podcast, an event, my immediate response was, sure, will you cover my expenses? But instead, I sent the email to my agent. And when it came back to me, right, that customer had paid $13,000 for me to attend. And so I'm sharing in that detail because there's value for what you do. And if your mission is to generate a revenue and to enable you to continue to create more good journalism to help educate your industry to win, there's nothing shameful in earning money in return for your effort. Yeah. And I probably felt a bit ashamed to start with, but I'm getting over it now. And so, those speaking engagements are coming in. I've got 3 booked. That's now generating money. But
Amazing.
What actually has become the mainstay of my earnings, and about 45-50% of my total earnings, um, is that I got this phone call out of the blue one day from a global consulting company, and they said, we manage accounts with thousands of publishers, and they keep sending us your email saying, we want to do that. So when you work for the media companies, they don't believe you. But if
Right.
they read it in your Substack, they go to a global consulting company and ask them to do it for you. If I worked
Spend
for them,
more
they wouldn't
money.
believe.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So there's something in that. There's something in that. And so they came to me and they said, look, this feels quite complicated and requires a lot of knowledge. So why don't you just do it for us? And so that consulting company came in and paid me an awful lot of money. Now, they offered me a full-time job, and this is a top tip. They offered me a full-time job on a very large US salary. And I didn't want to work for them full-time because A, I'm not a consultant really, and
Yeah.
I'm a journalist. And also, I wanted to have the freedom to be able to do the things that I do. I need time to do the stuff I do. I can't be busy 5 days a week doing this. And so I said to them, I'll take the job, but I'm only going to do it 3 days a week. And then I threw in at the end of the conversation, but I still want the salary. And they said yes. So not only was it an amazing salary to start with, it turned out to be a far bigger salary because the measure
Time well
of, yeah, because the measure of what I do isn't how many hours I spend in the office, it's my output.
That's
And
right.
so I can do for them in 3 days what might take somebody else 5 days or 7 days or something. And
Yeah.
so as a result, I now work for them 3 days a week. And that's sometimes it's busy, sometimes it's not. And
Sure.
that pays the vast majority of my money. So you've got sponsorship, syndication, podcasts, speaking and consulting. It's now expanding beyond that. I've now started making Netflix documentaries. So I've made the first one. It's out in January. That paid 250 grand all up. But I got, as a consultant on the business, I made 20. I've got two more currently waiting to be greenlit. Again, reporting on the same stuff we're talking about. So
Right.
it all
Right.
comes from the same place. So I've got two pieces left that I haven't done yet, Tony. So the first one is events. I'd quite like to spin this out to an events company, and so I'm just getting started on that. And the second thing is that I'm more and more frequently being asked to advise companies in their growth. And I haven't taken equity in another company. And the weird thing is, I'll tell you why. I gave away too much equity in my own company early. It's a lesson. When people say to me, I'll give you 20% of my company if you join my board, my response is, don't do that. Look,
Yeah.
I can be valuable to you as a board director and we can talk equity. But my first piece of free pro bono advice is don't give away your future now. If you genuinely think this thing's going to work, you're going to hate me for taking 20% in the future. So
Okay.
hold fire, let me help, and then I'm going to take equity. So I've got a short list of 3, 4 companies on the wall there that I'm looking at the moment.
Okay.
Because equity is going to be you can buy a house with this money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Yep.
everything else is cash flow. So look, it's been a successful year. It's taken 1 year to go from a standing start of nothing to 700 grand. And that's how I did it.
Incredible. So I know that we don't have a ton of time left. Anything new in the works? Anything that you see coming down the pike that you can share with the viewers?
Yeah, I think that we've had an era that's lasted, my experience, okay, I'm 50 now. And so for 25 years, media was a monopoly. Journalism was a monopoly. We made an
Yep.
absolute fortune. Everybody forgets that now. In fact, it's convenient for the media companies to forget that.
Yeah.
I think there's a rule of thumb that's basically monopoly's not bad if it's your monopoly. Yeah.
Yes. Of course.
And so yeah, so for the media companies, monopoly was great for 25 years, but we've now had a tech monopoly for 25 years. But that tech monopoly is also ending, right? If you actually look at the all of the strands of everything that's happening in big tech, I know they're still driving global stock markets. I know that everybody still thinks that they're superheroes, but they're not actually. They are yesterday's heroes in waiting. I was on stage with Google a little while ago and they said to me, why are you so down on us? I said, well, because I'm just bored of you now. You're just IBM in waiting. You're going to make a load of money and that's going to be great, but you're just IBM and no one's really going to care. I can tell you that no one has woken up in the last 2 years and said, I really hope to do a deal with Google today. So
Yeah,
you've
you're right.
lost your audience in the same way as the publishers lost their audience. So you are now experiencing what they experienced 25 years ago, and you laugh at them and deride them. But wiser people learn
Yep.
that you're a superhero for only a short length of time. No one's the best footballer in the league forever. You have
Correct.
your time and it's sunset. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm always looking at what is the rising trend. And the rising trend's
Mhm.
AI. So we get our information as newspapers. I used to write the story, hit publish, put it on a newsstand, and 13 million people would come and buy it. Okay? That was my measure of success. I told the news to 60 million people in the UK, and I hoped they cared about it.
Yeah.
Google turned it round. Google turned it round. It said, instead of me telling you the news that I think you want to know, you can tell me what you want to know and I'll give it to you. So we
Yep.
went from a telling medium to a listening medium. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well for both businesses. They've both made huge wealth and power. But that's ending as well. So what's happening? We're now getting to a world where the future of dissemination of information is going to be done by agents, and it's going to be increasingly audio and visual. And so I now sit in my car and have 45-minute chats with AI agents trying to learn about everything from the siege of Troy, I wrote about it
Yeah.
this week, to the future of antitrust, or all kinds of. I'm interested in string theory. I want to know how that works because I don't understand the logic of how something can be
Yeah.
there and not at the same time. I want to understand this stuff. I want to get it into my brain. And so I talk to the AI, and the AI tells me how to understand that.
Yep.
And so that's going to be the next 25 years, is the way that content is going to be distributed is going to change towards agents that react to you asking and getting the response in an audio, visual, and conversational manner. But there's a foundation that sits below all three of those eras. The news era and its monopoly, the tech industry and its monopoly, and the AI era and its monopoly. And the one thing is people's desire to know.
Yep.
As long as
That's
you
right.
satisfy people's desire to know, how you deliver it is always going to change, but they still need to know. So technology is a function, delivery is a function, the audience is the key, the content is the food, the audience is the consumer. You have to think about them every day and give it to them the way they want. If you do, you'll be in the next monopoly.
Ricky, this was awesome. I think we could go on for a couple more hours, but I'll spare you that. I didn't have to work through your agent for this interview, so I'm glad I didn't have to foot the bill for 13 large for this
I
one.
always look
But
after my
appreciate
friends, mate. Always look after my friends. You can buy me a beer in the next awesome pub we're in, okay?
I will buy you 10 beers at the next awesome pub that we're in. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. My pleasure as well. Thanks, Tony.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
Bye, buddy.